John Liskey at Redgrass SAS producer. You mentioned that oil and other commodities, potash and coal, other commodities on the railroad, actually grain is paying more. That's not really what we were told. There was at a meeting in Moose Jaw here a few days ago. Trader at P&H said that, or Trader from P&H, Winnipeg office, mentioned that oil is offering the railroads an extreme premium as far as hauling. So kind of confused about what that means, and if you could just elaborate on that, please.
There might be cases where there's spot prices, but my understanding is that oil is paying about 32 to 33 bucks a ton. Potash, I know, is lower, and it's all about competition. Potash can command a lower rate largely because most of their mines, if not, I think all but one, maybe two, are served by both railways. They can negotiate a better service deal, a better price deal. My understanding from people that I know in the oil industry is that the average price sits around $30 to $32, and that's largely because they sign long-term deals. Some of those deals that the oil companies have got are 10 years. Now, if they're offering spot price deals, those are things I couldn't find out about, and they probably wouldn't talk about. I'd be interested where this guy found it out. He probably talked to somebody inside a grain company who said that they made a deal. But the contract prices that they've got, long-term deals, they're pretty good.
Thank you. And that's certainly contrary, and I realize we've heard different in the country, so this is really revealing what Mark has told us today in regard to the competition from oil and potash and everything. So,
the other thing that I would point out about oil, there's a lot of people who want to turn around and want to say that, you know, a lot of that capacity is being shifted by the railways from grain to oil, and I frankly don't buy into that. And I'll tell you why. Number one is that the majority of our grain is moving west, and the oil is moving south and east. When it comes to putting resources in railroads into position, it happens geographically. So you've got to make sure that you hire the crews for the right amount of traffic that you put in place in places like Calgary, Golden, BC, Kamloops, Blue River, Jasper, Edmonton, all along the line. You know, those crews you can't just all of a sudden pick them up and move them. It's not a transferable skill like that. They have to understand the geography that they're running on. They have to there's a union agreements that say that you have to set boards every 6 months. So you can't just suddenly move those people like that. The same with, you have to make sure that you've got the locomotive power in place. You have to make sure that you've got the carmen and the mechanics who are going to fix something. They've all got to be in position. That doesn't happen at the snap of the finger. And so this belief that people have got that, they're just shifting the stuff around, moving all the resources on the oil side, it just doesn't make sense. In the real railroad world, it just doesn't happen that way. But I will tell you this one thing that does make a big difference in the way that railways behave in the marketplace is the difference between markets that are competitive and the ones that are not. Potash is competitive. Oil is competitive. Containers are competitive. Lumber and grain, not so much. And that's what kind of makes a big difference. Sorry.
My name is Ivan Costley. I'm from down the road, Mossbank. And I guess my point is one of clarity. You mentioned grain movement, and when you mentioned grain movement, I wondered, do you mention wheat and your cereal grains and canola together, or is it, because you mentioned a number of 42 million metric tons as grain, and then later you mentioned 80 million tons as grain movement. That's
the five majors plus peas, lentils.
In the 80 million?
Yeah.
So what is the 42
The
million?
only thing, sorry, the 42?
Yeah, I thought you had mentioned early in your
Well, that
presentation.
was, earlier in the presentation, if you went back to 13 years ago to 13 years ago to 5 years ago, 42 to 45 million tons was what the average production was of all those crops. And we've seen an increase by about 10 million tons in the time that we've been monitoring the grain engine transportation system.
Okay, and
Production has gone up.
then you had mentioned earlier our historic production of 30 to 31 million tons.
No, it's been historically, we're about 40 to 45.
45, okay. now-
But what we're seeing in terms of the export market right now is between 28 and 31 million metric tons. That's what it's been on the
31 million is export. Okay, that clears it up for me. Thank you very much. Another thing I have always had a huge problem with is, like, I farm, we all farm, right? We know how to tackle a big job and get it done, right? And I know when the job's so big that I think I can't even begin to get at it, you break it down into small jobs and you pick off the small ones, and then before you know it, you got it done. But for some reason, the railway thinks that huge trains are the way to go. So they're so busy putting these huge trains together, and nobody can, manage it and get it all together, and the train sits there and waits and waits and waits till they get enough trains. And I think they should go to the small job approach, where it's basically get a couple engines, get your, 30, 40 trains, and get them out there and get them moving.
It's all about cost management with them. It doesn't, they're not concerned about how fast it gets there or what it does to your business. They're concerned about reducing their costs.
But you're here telling this group of farmers that if there is a cost loss here in those trains sitting,
Yeah, but not to the railway.
well, I think somehow we gotta get that through to the railway. That cost is so insignificant, we don't wanna see those trains sitting.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I think this is the hard thing that I have in trying to portray the situation, and I think it's been put very well again by my friend Wade there, is that and this is particularly the case when you're in a marketplace that is non-competitive. For producers, for grain companies, their motivation and their desire is to move more and more grain, sell more, move more, grow more. But that's not necessarily the motivation of the railways, especially in a non-competitive marketplace. Their motivation is to move the appropriate amount of grain that optimizes their asset utilization and reduces their cost base to its lowest possible level and pretty much eliminates any kind of risk they've got. That's what their motivation is. And it's in conflict with the idea of moving the grain.
Yeah.
And that's where our problem lies.
Yeah.
And paying them more, by the way, does not necessarily fix that, because paying them more just means that they can make more money doing the same thing that they're doing.
Yeah, well, I thank you for that. I think we agree, but we don't know how to fix it, right?
No.
Just a quick question. I'm in the advanced newspaper. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I got a lot of voice, so maybe I'll just talk. So my question is that I've heard talked to a lot of politicians, and a lot of people that are actually blaming the grain companies for the situation more than the railways. They're actually apologizing a lot for the railways in the situation, saying, well, the grain companies are not bringing enough grain in, therefore, the railways are not incentivized to bring more cars in to ship it. Is this a chicken and egg situation where if the grain companies brought in more grain, there would be more rail cars allocated, or is there one party that has more blame than the other?
Here's one of those times where I have to pick a side. In this case, I don't blame the grain companies. As I've watched them, especially through this crop year, every one of the grain companies is buying as much grain as they can possibly buy and putting it into their elevators. They're doing things within the marketplace, such as widening the basis that sends market signals. I think probably one of the greatest heartaches that a grain company will have today is having to go no call, no bid at elevators. You know, they're in the business of buying grain. When they have to set up a situation where they can't buy grain, imagine what that feels like. So, no, I think where I see this right now is that the railways made a commitment to the grain companies about how many cars they would supply. Grain companies took that commitment and they went and they made sales deals with buyers all over the globe, signed contracts, and they did it with time constraints that were promised to them by the railways. And then they went out and they set up vessel charters with ocean vessel lines and brought the ships in to load. I mean, their show of good faith is evidenced in the fact that they made the sales, that they've hired the vessels and everything. And in the process of doing that, they bought as much grain as they possibly can, because if you look at what the inventories are in the country, you can't put much more grain into the elevator system than what we've got sitting out there today. So I'm kind of having a hard time. I've heard this before where people are saying, well, it's all, you know, it's the grain company's fault. And I don't buy that. From where I sit as a grain monitor and watching this thing for the last 13 years, this is what I think the definition of what the problem is that there's an overcommitment on the part of the railways.
Mark, Rick Swenson, I farm south of Moose Jaw, but I'm also a former energy and mines minister in Saskatchewan. Fair understanding of bulk commodities. I have a couple of questions. As part of your contract, do you monitor the amount of rolling stock that is available in any given period of time, i.e. engine power, cars, that type of thing?
No,
Why not?
because it's not part of our mandate, and when we asked the railways for it, they refused. And so Minister Ritz, in his latest request of the railways, has insisted that be one of the things that the railways start providing us. We'll see what the railways do. At this point in time, I'm not sure whether the railways are going to agree to it now. But when we first started the program, we asked for it and we said no.
Because I remember during the process of taking the board's logistical duties away and going to a different marketplace, that the issue of cars, i.e. hopper cars that were paid for by producers, and I think both Alberta and Saskatchewan also have hopper cars. And the railways were fairly adamant that they didn't want that issue as part of the discussion. And I would think that if we're going to get a handle on this situation, that we would want to know on a fairly regular basis what the disposition of that was. I know growing up in Moose Jaw, CPR is part and parcel of your classmates, whatever. And I've been told by a number of my engineer friends that they used to keep a certain percentage of diesels in the Moose Jaw yard because it is such a central part of their system, ready to go, because as they got colder, they would begin to lose air in the length of trains. If you had to insert more diesels in order to keep your pressures up, the more cars you added on. And today that's not done.
No.
You don't see those diesels idling in the Moose Jaw yard in order to make up the air that they need to go with the longer trains.
No.
And I would have thought during this rate cap discussion that goes on an ongoing basis, that is part of their cost, that things like the number of diesels available for air, for trains and movement would be part of the discussion. And I'm amazed that it's not been part of your mandate, because it doesn't give us producers an adequate picture of what's going on in our world. And we're told today that to market properly, we need to take into account all of our cost variables in order to do a good job. And yet you don't have the information.
No, we don't. And it's one of the things that the government has asked of the railways to provide to us, but so far we haven't got it. Most importantly, though, I think over and above what the fleet size is and the like, I think one of the things that we've asked for is to actually get car allocation numbers from the railways. Because the railways have got a big blanket over that. Laura, you know, to be blunt about it, railways decide how much market share each grain company gets, what trade lanes they get to move in. For instance, right now, they're not providing much in the way of car supply into the US markets, even though prices in the US markets are considerably higher than what they are at, say, Vancouver. But it works better for the railways if they move it to the West Coast. So that's kind of the situation that we're in today. No, I couldn't agree with you more, but, and the government is moving in that direction. Let's see where they go, so let's see what happens.
Moving isn't good enough, you gotta tell them.
Well, but it's not mine. We've told.
Two more questions, then I think we need to move on, and if there's time at the end, we'll proceed with the questions.
All about 3, 4.
Okay, 3 short ones, okay?
Okay, here's a simple analogy that I find very, very concerning. We talked a little bit about it before with you, Mark, but as a ratepayer in the Army 74, I can complain to my REIT and not have to be concerned that my road won't get graded because I complain. I can complain to my MLA and not be concerned that the road between the Flush and Brownwood will not get rebuilt. And I can complain to my federal government, to my MP, and not be concerned about retribution. But I know that the short lines and the grain elevator managers are intimidated to complain. And this is Canada. I believe that we should have the right, freedom of speech should be in our process here. Thanks, can you identify that? Because we were talking about it before.
There are a number of people within the industry and the trade who are not comfortable speaking because they believe that the railways will exact retribution in one form or another. And whether or not that's founded, I guess, is proof is in the pudding, but I believe that there are some grain companies who have suffered by that. There's a truth to that. So that's what happens when you're in a competitive marketplace like the one we have, a non-competitive marketplace.
Lonnie McKay, guy farm just out the railway track at Oklahoma. Mr. Chairman, first of all, for the media's sake, I'd just like to congratulate APAS on putting on these meetings today in Assiniboia and tomorrow in Humboldt to bring this issue to the forefront of agriculture within Saskatchewan, because I truly believe that over the last 4 or 5 months, there's been an incredible amount of money lost to farmers, and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. And I'll be touching on that yesterday. So congratulations to APAS. Full credit to you for bringing this forward, because I think we're into a situation where this can be, I'm not sure catastrophic is the right word, but incredibly significant to the economy of farmers in the next few months. Now, you also said that you would take wild and crazy and weird and ideas from the floor today, and it's like you know me, because tomorrow I will give you a hint that in Humboldt, I will be calling for a potential look into changing the rate cap. And don't get me wrong, I do not believe for 1 second, I'm with Mark on this one, that changing and increasing rate cap will, in the long term, produce the desired results that we think it will. So I don't believe by paying the railways twice as much money that we will get twice the service. So I'm coming from that. But if we looked at it and adjusted the rate cap or did a slight adjustment for an 8 or 10 month period and said to the railways, here's your trial period. You have 8 months to perform. If you don't perform in those 8 months, starting as soon as technically possible, we know that that doesn't work for the net profit of farmer. So I'm going to throw that out as an idea. We aren't throwing out the whole system, a short adjustment period, and look at it. And if the railways can't perform in that 8 to 10 months, which would maybe solve some of the backlog problem, just say to them, well, we've solved that issue, that you don't have to come back and ask us for a rate cap down the road. The other thing this is a nonpartisan issue. This is every farmer right now in Western Canada, and all the businesses are being affected by this. We saw a couple weeks ago when there's a threat by a union on going on strike, that within a day or two, that the government can stand up, we're prepared to bring in legislation to create a solution to that problem. That was it, and that's so that the railways, the unions didn't go on strike for a week. Then now we see, that's at the same time when the railroads were about 4 to 6 weeks behind in what they projected their car movement would be at that time. And there was nobody standing up and saying, look, we're going to stop the unions from going on strike because it's catastrophic. And I agree, by the way, it would have been horrible for the unions to go on strike for that week. But the railroads were 4 to 6 weeks behind, and we had nobody jumping up and saying, we're going to bring legislation in to correct that. So, Mark, if you want to comment.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what the question
I think it was a statement more than a question. Sorry.
I know that as soon as the road, I do know because I talked to the guys in the government on a daily basis that when it came to the strike, I don't think it was 15 minutes before they started to write back to work legislation. That in Transport Canada, the guys were like on it like that. On the revenue cap, I said my piece. All I'd say is be careful what you ask for because you might get it.
Ivan Costley. I just had wanted to make you aware of something. I don't know. I travel the province quite extensively, all the way from Orange down the border, east and west. And at this time of year, it's very common to see a lineup of rail cars parked in the middle of the country. Like last year, it was from Bateman to Growler. That's some 20 miles long. Young to, or Watrous to Young. I've seen them over at Kindersley, and it seems that the railways take these cars and put them out of production purposely and almost want to hide them from the government. Can you comment on that, please?
I don't think that I make it my business to go find them and take pictures of them. They store cars. And part of the rationalization of doing that is that putting more cars on the service is not always the best solution to the problem. Capacity, there's an old adage in railroad, is you can either buy steel or you can buy time. Time is a lot less expensive. The faster you move cars, the more capacity you actually bring into the system. And so I subscribe to the theory, and it's probably one of the few things I agree with Hunter Harrison on this, is that the faster you move things, the more capacity you bring on, the more efficient you can run your railroad, because you reduce the possibility or potential for congestion. There's a point in time where you have to bring more cars in. And so you keep them in a storage place where you can grab them and pull them into service in a fairly quick period of time. So that, having them stored in this area, that makes perfectly good sense to me. But there are times where, the volumes are just not there to support bringing them in. I think they push the envelope far too far. They do it with both, to the point about the locomotives, trimming locomotives and sweating the assets, sweating cars and everything. I think they've taken that principle of using higher velocity and sweating assets past the point of where it makes any sense, because it's impacting the ability of their ability to add capacity into the system. But storing cars isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Just in regard to the rail cap, I'm glad that you took the opportunity to talk to us about that, Mark, because I think we have to be really careful what we ask for. I think Professor James Nolan a couple of years ago estimated removal of the rail cap, and we might have to talk about this, would cost us between 25 and 50% more to move our grain in the future. And I did a little dirt farmer arithmetic from our shipping point at Gull Lake. It cost me $1.24 a bushel in freight charges to ship my grain from Gull Lake up to Vancouver, my hard red spring wheat. I ordinarily like to grow around 40 bushel of wheat, so that is a cost to me, $1.24 bushel times 40 bushel to the acre. That is a per acre cost of $50 an acre. That's my highest single input cost on my farm. This year I was part of the success story in agriculture. We grew 60 bushels of wheat, so at $1.24 a bushel, my cost per acre for freight will be $74 an acre. That's incredible. And I would ask you to go to your elevator manager, find out what your real cost is in dollars per bushel to move that grain. It's also interesting if you put it in a big figure. Our Viterra terminal spot is 112 cars. To move that 112 cars from Bell Lake to Vancouver is a total gross return to the railway of $474,969. Nearly $500,000 for 112 cars to go from Bell Lake out to Vancouver. Now, I'm just a farmer. Those seem like big figures to me. I know they don't seem like it to the railway. But I think we have to be very, very careful what we ask for in terms of rail movement here.